I need you to hate so I can use you for your energy.
This is Real Sales Talk. Real sales advice from real sales practitioners. Giving you tips on how to dominate your sales quota are your co-hosts, Sean Mitchell and Phill Keene.
We don't have a process for referrals at most companies. I go into a company, I say, what's your referral process? They have no, well, what do you mean?
I think that goes back to the premise that why do salespeople suck at prospecting? I mean, number one reason why they suck at prospecting is they don't actually do it.
If you are successful and nobody knows, in 2016, 20, 2025, you're not successful.
You ever want to find out what's going on in the company? Get in the car and spend a day with the top 3 salespeople. You'll find out in 5 minutes.
Because you can't be a trusted advisor without 2 things, trust and advice. I mean, you need both of them.
What is going on, Real Sales Talk family? We're back with episode 6 in season 6 with Sean and Phill Keene as your guest and host at the same time, doing double duty today. We had some topics we wanted to discuss, and Sean and I just want to get started and talk about a few different things. One is value inside of selling and price and negotiation a little bit, which we had a topic a little bit. We had Jim Brown on. We talked about negotiation, didn't get deep into the topic, so we wanted to go a little bit further on that. And then another topic that I've had some conversations around with some other peers, where we started talking through what happens with the role of a sales development rep or a business development rep in the future, next 5 years, 10 years, how AI is affecting that. Really just kind of where sales is going in general. And I think all of it kind of ties back into it. So hope you guys enjoy, but you have Sean and Phill for the next 30 minutes. Sean.
What's up, Phill?
What is going on, man?
Yeah. So for a Real Sales Talk family, one of the reasons why we're doing this with just Phill and I is because we think there's some value in, well, I mean, one of the whole reasons why this podcast exists is because we want this to be a from sales practitioners to sales practitioners type podcast where you're actually getting real life lessons and lessons learned from the field. So we'd like to once a season, one episode a season, talk about some of the things that we're learning in our sales roles. And we do that a little bit when we kind of jam on tech talk, but really the focus of that is to highlight sales tools and sales resources to help you grow. So this episode is going to be just diving into some of the things that are top of mind to us, some of the experiences, some of the lessons learned. So we want to give it to you straight from the horse's mouth. And one of the things that I kind of came across over the last week is this idea of discounting. So, think about this. When someone asks for a discount, is that the best you can do? Or is there any way you can do better than that? This whole idea of discounting, and we touched on this a little bit with our conversation with Mark Hunter from last week, which was great, by the way. You should go back and listen to it for sure. But discounting and building value. How do you get a deal closed without discounting your product or your service? It seems like, as I'm shadowing more and more some of the real estate agents on my team, that discounting commission on a real estate transaction seems to be sort of common. And I guess the longer that I'm in the seat, the more that I'll have a bit better understanding, of how that works. But I'm a firm believer, Phill, in building a lot of value, building so much value that when the pricing discussion comes up, they're thinking, gosh, can I really afford this? You've built up so much value in what your company can do or what you can do that they're wondering if they are going to be able to afford the product or service that you're talking to them about. So how do you, this is a question that I'm going to flip to you, Phill. How do you do that? How do you build up so much value that they're even, they're wondering, am I going to be able to afford this?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and this is all things. This is from my experience in B2C to my experience in B2B and selling multiple different types of products. Selling a product in my past life where it's just hypotheticals and hypothesis of what could potentially happen, to where now at Octave where we have a product with a very real problem that we solve. I always go back to, as I start to talk to people in sales, is in the absence of value, things always go to price. Prove value, there's absolutely no way that I'm not going to go into the conversation with you. Sean, how much does it cost? Great. I don't see the value in that price. I want to talk to you about this. So it's the opposite way of what you're talking about. Is you talk through is make you spend so much that you're afraid of the price a little bit, or you're in the conversation where it's, I don't know if I can afford this. But in the absence of, if you show enough value, the way I think about it, actually, I want to write a book on this. So anybody steals this, you better make me a co-author. There's an economic scale to value in a conversation with sales. The more value I can add, I'm willing to pay in a price. And I'm not talking price of just dollar amount. Price could be, it's the amount of people I'm asking for you to reach out to inside of your organization, or things I'm looking you to commit to. It is things like getting from the buyer, where it might be a case study, or it might be a trade-off where it's there's no value to it from a price side or actual dollar amount. So I think that's it. How do you give enough value that someone's willing to pay that price? For me, it starts at the very, very lowest. How I train people on it is, let's start at the feature side, which is where you don't want to have a conversation go. When you start talking features is where you want to start talking price, which is benefit. So go from feature to benefit. So what's the benefit of that feature? And then ultimately, what value does that drive by having that benefit in an organization? So if you think that way, you reverse it, where let's start at the lowest common denominator, the things that people know, the tactical things of features, and you take it up a level to benefits, and you take it up a level again to value. You're ultimately going to be able to keep your conversation in value, where I can say things like, I'm going to make you bigger, faster, and stronger, Sean. And you can challenge me and say, well how? On the benefit. And then I get that, but how would you give me that benefit? Well, 3 features. It changes your conversation where you're showing them the high level of value, where they're not having to do mental gymnastics to figure out how they would pay for it, or why it makes sense for the business to do that. So it's in the absence of value, people always go back to price.
So I want to talk about 2 companies that do little to no discounting, and we can use them as talking points for the rest of this conversation about the topic. So these are 2 companies that I enjoy personally, and hopefully get you thinking about how you can provide a lot of value, so that your product or service is worth paying for without discounting. So the first company is Apple. Apple is very judicious with their discounting. In fact, the only couple of times, maybe even one time, the only 2 times a year that they do any sort of discounting, and we're talking nominal discounting, 5% discounting, is back to school and Black Friday. The other times, everyone pays full price for a premium product. Why do people do that? Because people see value. People see value in it. And they create a great product, right? Something over a long period of time without it being good quality. So That's the first company. The other company that I know of that I benefit from personally, that I paid a premium for at a discount, and they're another company who does not discount, or very rarely discounts. I know in some situations I've seen them do some minor discounting, but even recently, Elon Musk, their CEO, has reiterated the fact that he does not want to discount the products, brand new products. So, how do and I'll turn this Phil, so you can kind of answer, and then I'll kind of share my thoughts on this. But how do companies like Apple and Tesla sell products successfully without discounting?
So I think with the difference that Apple, in personal opinion, Apple and Tesla, and you can agree because you're a consumer of both of those products, is they're sexy, right? You get it, and you get a premium product. You know what they put out there is it's cutting edge, it's new. You know it's going to be functionally good, so you trust them. That's something that really it's in the core of what they do. I've actually read something that Elon Musk said. He wants somebody, when they buy a Tesla, to own it for 10 years. Same thing, like I buy my Apple computer because I know it's going to last for 5 years. It's functionally better than anything I've ever purchased outside of that. So you're paying a premium, and you've proven that the premium works. So I think that's some of it. There's an interesting tactic. There's a book that everybody should look at, or there's a TED Talk by a person named Simon Sinek. And it's called Start With Why. So look it up. There's a TED Talk. It's 15 minutes of your day. Probably the best investment from a sales perspective you can think about. The whole premise is start with why. And it talks about exactly Apple, of how Apple was better at selling an iPod than HP or Dell. Quit funds and access to talent, and everything was pretty much equal playing field, but Apple was successful and other people weren't. And they talked through that premise, and it was starting everything with why. This is a company, not why they built a product. So it was they exist as a company to be innovative and to be cutting edge and to challenge the status quo. So people kind of always have that resonate with their brand. I think if you get to that high of a level to where you're starting with why you exist and why I'm talking to you today, and not down to the feature level, it's going to change the way the conversations go, and your value is going to be ultimately seen there. And I'm curious to see from your perspective. So you're a consumer of both Tesla and Apple. Why did you purchase the products?
Yeah, I purchased them because I know that I'm getting quality products that won't break, or that won't fall apart in a shorter amount of time than what I anticipate or expect or even need. I bought them because, yes, they are more of a premium product. They're more than your average product. My first car was a 2000. My first new car that I bought was a very modest 2006 Toyota Corolla, and at the time it was what I could afford. But even then, with Toyota, they had a great reputation for lasting a long time, and at that price point that I could afford, I knew I needed something that was going to get me through many years. So with Tesla, it's the same thing. I pay a little bit more because I know what I'm getting, and I know it's going to last me a long time, and I'm going to get a lot of miles out of it. And just like what you said with the computer, with the Apple computer, when I purchase it, I don't have to have any concern about it not performing over a long period of time. I mean, I think, I'm trying to remember, the last computer was a MacBook Air that I had, and I mean that was a 6 or 7 year computer for me, and it did great. It never had any issues at all, except for storage, and that just happens over time when you save stuff to your computer. But they've done a great job. they've built a great reputation and great product. And so I think when you have a lot of value, and I'll kind of bring this back to how does this relate to a salesperson and how they can sell without discounting. So the objective, I think, for a salesperson is to, number one, understand what the person's needs are. You can't build a lot of value without understanding what that company is trying to get at. And so asking a lot of questions, I think, is really key. Really in investigating this. Someone that I know does this really, really well, I think, is Jim Keene. He does a really good job at asking a lot of questions and not just going, one or two layers deep, but multi-layer questions to try and understand what someone is trying to get at. So shout out to Keene. So you really have to understand what they're trying to accomplish, where their problems are, where the opportunities are, so that when you start to get into how your product or service can help them, you're addressing all of those things and aligning all those things up with your product. And so how does this relate to what the salesperson can do when you get to that pricing point? If you've done a good job at addressing their challenges, their opportunities, their obstacles, you've got to know how your product or service aligns with that. And if you accomplish those things and you match those, you be that perfect matchmaker. That's probably the first thing that you can do to avoid this discounting problem or negotiating on discount. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not completely opposed to discounting, but your first objective should be to accurately align their challenges and their problems and their opportunities with your product. If your product doesn't do a good job at matching up their opportunities, then end the conversation as soon as possible after they get done telling you, where their challenges are at in a specific area. So do a good job at asking questions and addressing where your product or service fits is the first thing. The other technique that I've used in that I will use in this real estate role is something that Jim Brown talked about on our interview when we interviewed him, which is price anchoring. So price anchoring is the technique, the psychological technique of there's many different ways to use it, but it's talking about a greater number, a higher number than what your actual product cost. And I'm seeing two faces of Phill. That's really funny.
Yeah, but I'm not sure if I'm going to be muted. Can you hear me now?
I can, yeah.
Good. So I'm having some technical difficulties on our end.
It's all good.
Price anchoring, I think it's strong, and I think it's a valid point as you start to have that conversation around adding value, but also proving that, hey, I know it's worth this much. Like this is what it should cost you.
Yeah.
And throwing that big number out there. I think at the same time, the way I always put it, there's an acronym I use, is just WIFM, which is what's in it for me. And if you can resonate on a personal level with a person that you're selling to, where it's, Sean, if I do this for you, what's it mean for you ultimately? And they can figure it out. It could be promotion. It could be they become more effective at their job. It could be whatever that is. That together, where I know the value of my product, I can prove it out, but also I can help you specifically. It changes the way that they look at the product, and it changes the way that, or services or whatever it is you're selling. And you have to get them to that level where they understand how it hits them at a personal level.
Yeah. So one of the ways that you can do this, because I know people listening are going to say, well, how exactly do you do that? Once you've identified that your product or service can address a particular need, here's a good question that you can ask. What sort of impact, and I like to use financial impact. So what sort of financial impact does that have if we can help you with X, and get them to say, or get them to identify specifically, or generally speaking, what sort of financial impact that's going to have. So if the impact is a $50,000 impact, and your product is $5,000, you know that you've been able to leverage that psychological connection to $50,000, even though you haven't even gotten to price. If you can help save them $50,000, and they remember that $50,000 in their mind, when you bring up pricing at the end, or whenever it's appropriate, $5,000 really doesn't seem that much if you can save them $45,000 or $50,000. So that's one way to use it. But you can also, maybe it's not a financial impact, but maybe it's time, in associating that time with other things. If your product can save them time, then they can be free to do other things, which then can produce more productivity for the company, which then is almost always tied to revenue. So I think that's a really, really good, one of my favorite ways to leverage price anchoring, build value, build lots of value. I save you $50,000 by you implementing a $5,000 product.
Yeah, I think it's strong. I like the idea of, like, what's your financial impact if we were to go do this today, especially if you haven't had to throw price out there yet. I think it's a great way, and it's actually a good counter too. So where somebody might start with well, how much do you cost? It might be a great, hey, this is what we're going to cost, and you're just upfront and honest. But if you implemented this to your business, if you put this together, and it's a good way to counter a little bit, or counter punch a little bit, where somebody throws that, hey, well, what do you cost to you, before automatically going into a discount.
Yeah. So here's how I would respond to that. When I get that question, especially when it's in the very beginning, I'm leveraging price anchoring even by responding to that, by saying, that's a fantastic question. Pricing for our product ranges. It could be up to $100,000. But somewhere in between, $50,000 and $100,000. They will remember that $100,000, and then what I'd probably say is, as we start to talk a little bit more, and as I start to learn a little bit more about your business, we can probably narrow down a price point by the end of our conversation. How does that sound? Or does that sound good? And that's a good transition into asking questions, or doing discovery phone call, or trying to figure out a little bit more about their business.
Absolutely. I think it also, if you're able to get that deep into a conversation and get to the place where you prove value out, it ultimately should speed deals up. It should push things further, and it gives them the ability to be an internal advocate for you a little bit stronger. It does a lot of things for you if you can really truly prove that there's value in a conversation that they're having.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we've kind of talked about discounting, and I think the summary is build up a lot of, understand the business, understand their challenges, so that you can determine if your product or service is a right fit, and if it is, then align what your product can do with their challenges. And if you do that, you'll be in a good position to avoid discounting, and incorporating price anchoring into that conversation can be a really great way to, when you get to the end of the conversation and start talking about pricing, they feel like they're getting a really, really great deal, because you've leveraged something greater, a larger number, whether it has to do with pricing or not, to contrast what the actual cost of your product or service is. So let's we've got let's take 10 or 15 minutes here, Phill, and talk about some of the things that you have in mind.
Yeah, so I've had, like I said earlier, I've had a lot of conversations recently with people that are kind of interested in what's going to happen with the specialization of the SDR role, and that are concerned about how it works, what happens in 5 years with AI, which I know you have some interesting perspective on, what happens with just sales in general. I'd love to hear your thoughts from being someone that's been on the receiving end of leads that have been passed over from a BDR, SDR, or whatever you guys call it, so sales development, business development rep, account development rep. You guys have heard a lot of different terms for it. So I'd love to hear your perspective from somebody that's actually received things from a BDR. But really, like my point a lot of times when I make to people is there's an economics to it that can play out with a BDR role, where it's very, very, very expensive. And there's a lot of factors into why that actually happens, which you can go into more detail. But I'd love to hear from you, Sean. What do you think is going to happen with the evolution of this role? And what have you seen so far that's kind of been a problem with the role?
Great questions. I'll preface this by saying that I've never managed a BDR team, and I've primarily sat in the seat of an account executive in companies that were very early stage. So I've helped a number of companies go from, almost zero revenue to $10,000, $15,000, $30,000 of revenue, of recurring revenue. So with that said, I think it's interesting, and I'm just kind of piecing through my thoughts here as I'm talking. So I apologize if it sounds like that, but I do think it's interesting. This is kind of a new kind of formalized role. So where does this go in the future? Like if I look 10 years in the future, I do think artificial intelligence will have an impact on that. In this specific way, if you can leverage technology and software to qualify and pre-qualify your opportunities, where does the BDR stand if software can do that very same thing more efficiently? So that's one thought I have. Looking far into the future, and 10 years is in technology terms is like a century. So things will move, I think, quite fast when sales teams start to implement software like this, and it'll only increase what software can do for salespeople. Ultimately, I think software will be could likely be the BDR to help qualify leads and kick them to account executives, and maybe eventually even further down the road, maybe. And I know this is heresy, and I've talked about this a few times, but software could take the place of salespeople altogether. I'm not so religious about or romantic about the idea of a salesperson that I can't envision software replacing salespeople. I think it's possible down the line, yeah. So I mean, I think that's an interesting thought.
Yeah.
I'll take a pause there.
I think there's definitely a chance for it. So, and the conversation goes into, well, if the economics don't make sense and people are trying to go be more profitable rather than taking a lot of funding and just burning cash, then what happens to SDRs and BDR teams in 5 to 10 years? The only place I've ever seen it work, and work is a relative term, is people that have scaled out and have the ability to kind of self-fund a program and take it a little bit in the red and not massively hurt the business. So they need the revenue more than they need the margin in that sense. There's a certain size of company where I think it makes sense. I don't think you would ever put an SDR team in place and look for it to be 100% effective, less than $10 million, or really even $50 million. I think there's a lot that goes into it. And there's a lot of reasons why. So the problem with smaller companies, so call it pre-$1 million companies or really even pre-$10 million companies, is one, you might have it figured out. You might be close to a product market fit, but you're still not 100% sure. Products and pivoting things quickly. You don't have a sophisticated enough sales org that has a process that's consistent. So you really don't know input output yet. So when you have an SDR team that is tenure is pretty short because you're promoting them quickly to then take on the next role to be an account executive, which is typically what happens at a $1 million company, is that SDRs enroll for 4 to 5 months. And historically, at some of these larger companies, we've seen that ramp takes up to 6 months. Is you're getting people that never actually even get ramped up and know how to even talk about the product. So you're never getting full capacity out of these people before they get promoted. So then you're promoting something that's not even ready to even prospect on their own. They're even trying to now close deals. So it puts you in a weird position. And then the second side of it, you're putting the person most likely that's the best performer in that role is getting promoted. So now you're taking the best person out of that role, and you probably don't have dozens and dozens of SDRs or BDRs. You probably have 5 or 6 in the $1 million, $10 million range of companies. So you're promoting the top performer. So your best person is now out of that group, and now you have 5 people that are okay at their job that still aren't quite ramped, and then you promote them even quicker than that. So maybe it's you're promoting them in 9 months. It takes 6 months to ramp, and your production is only 3 months. The constant churn of the role is a major problem for the economics of it. Like, they're never going to pay themselves off. I mean, it takes 24 months roughly for them to actually be ramped where they actually have the ability to have capacity to pay for themselves. So I think that's a major problem that people at a smaller company, they just don't see. They never understand why it doesn't work. So my recommendation is definitely go into longer terms and set the expectation from day one. I think we talked about this in a podcast I did in season 2 a little bit, was in the role for 18 months, you now have been ramped up, you've been producing for a year, and now you have a chance to potentially be effective enough in the role that you're going to pay for yourself. It's a massive problem across most organizations when it comes to BDRs and SDRs. And it's funny because if you go to a lot of the large organizations where it works, right? It works, is those BDRs are BDRs for 3 to 5 years before they get promoted, rather than 6 to 10 months, 6 to 12 months. So I think that's something that they have figured out, that the economics just don't work unless 10 years longer. So that's kind of my thoughts. So you have to have longer tenure and you have to do it well. And then I also think that's where a lot of this account-based stuff is coming in, is we're trying to get hyper-focused and trying to find deals that fit the economics, what the current state of technology sales is, or really just inside sales in general. So we're trying to find deals that are larger deals and sourcing larger deals that have higher margins, so it can cover some of these costs of us just burning through cash. I definitely am interested to see where it goes in 5 to 10 years, but I think AI is going to play a factor, especially right away, in like data sourcing, and getting you to the place where it basically just puts a command center in front of you, to where I might be able to push a button and Sean can hit play, and all of a sudden I have, here's a 50 task today to do, and I don't have to go do any of the manual prospecting work, or I don't have to do the manual lookup of personalization. It just puts it in front of me, and then I make the decisions. And then eventually, if AI can get good enough, it's actually being the one that communicates with that person, and all you're doing is getting me the person that I can respond back to that take it to the next step. So I think the world of sales is going to change. I'm curious to see what that does when there's no bullpen, essentially, that you're building a team to then be your next group of people to be in sales. Like, where do you cut your teeth in sales now? That's going to be a really interesting dynamic in the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, I don't know what happens. I don't know what happens at that point. I mean, it seems like traditionally that BDR role, and I have to make a correction when I said my experience with early stage companies was $15,000 to $30,000. Actually, I meant 15 million, 30 million of recurring revenue. Big difference. But I do think it's interesting. You know, where does that entry level person go, and do they stay in that role? Do they have to stay in that role for a minimum period of time if they're new and fresh? I don't know. In order for it to be worth it to have those types of teams, I think it's an interesting question. I think it's an interesting thought that I mean, do you consider like the intangible benefits of having, you know, fresh salespeople, new people in those roles? Do you consider the intangible benefits of basically that being a training ground, not necessarily what they produce, lead wise and revenue wise, but the training ground for, learning some of the basic elements of sales, learning some of the cultural things about that company. How do you factor those things in when you talk about the value of a BDR team?
I think if your company can sustain the loss as they ramp up, yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of companies I speak to where they're looking for an SDR manager and they're less than $1 million and they have 6 SDRs right now and they don't know why they're not producing. And it's one of those things that I think about, just maybe average cost of an SDR all in, call it 85 to be healthy. So now you're talking, you're spending $500,000 a year on SDRs. Now you want an SDR manager on top of that. So that cost even goes up higher, on top of commissions to the sales team, that the leads that they pass off. So you're really talking, can you spend $250,000 of maybe a wash? If you're lucky, if you're $1 million company, you really think you're gonna have a net or a wash of $750,000 roughly. You're going to lose money on it. And I think that's if you feel like you can sustain it with an SDR program that's small, then I think you try to go all in on it. I think early on, I think you have to have people that can hunt their own deals and fish for their own deals. And it takes a certain size of company that can sustain it as a program like that. But to you, your point is there's an added benefit, is your ability a training ground, a place for your sales team to go learn and cut their teeth. What I have seen people is that they'll hire them, like the AE team, and they'll force them to go out and prospect on their own first and build their own pipeline first before they turn on anything from a marketing generated funnel, or before they turn on anything from the BDR funnel as well. So they actually make them go prospect and figure it out on their own. So it kind of trains them on culture, trains them on product, and try to go figure things out, and then they flip it on. Your company of how do you want to grow and how fast and aggressive you want to grow. If the whole idea is volume and you want to push as hard as you possibly can, I think it's a great idea. I'm a huge SDR advocate and specialist. I think it makes sense. I think the role makes sense. But you got to do it right. And I think there's a lot of problems that exist today. And the biggest problem, I think, is that we are promoting SDRs and BDRs way too quickly. And we're not setting that expectation from day one with them.
Yeah. So I've always done the prospecting and the sales calls. I've just been in places where they weren't as developed initially, and
right.
as that revenue starts to come in, kind of like what you're talking about, as that revenue starts to come in and they can afford to have a new sales rep or someone new in the sales seat get into a BDR role and help kind of pre-qualify, then it makes it a little bit more palatable, I think, for the company. But early on, and I know we've talked about this before, and it may have been on the season 2 conversation or season 3, but you've got to kind of do like a hybrid role, where you've got to go out and you've got to prospect, you've got to outbound, you've got to pre-qualify, and then carry that sale from start to finish line.
Yeah, it's interesting because I get a question a lot of what's my first sales hire? A lot of people want to know that. And your first sales hire, if you're a closer and you're a founder, then maybe hire an SDRs, 2 SDRs that you can ramp up into an AE quickly is a good thing. So have them go prospect meetings for you, have them ride along with you as they figure out how to start closing deals, and then turn them into closers that are also now prospecting on their own. If you are not a salesperson, I have to go hire a salesperson.
Yeah.
At the same time, you can't go hire somebody that's from a multi-billion-dollar company to come be your closer, because they're going to have no idea what to do when it comes to like not having their own leads that get filtered into them. So you have to go find someone that can cut their teeth, that have been at these pre-million-dollar type companies that know they have to go fight for it and work for it. That's the type of person you need to go hire. It's really, really hard. It's really easy to look at a resume and be like, oh, that's kind of a sexy company that they used to work for. I think the roles in the next 5 to 10 years is going to be very, very different. I think it's going to be a lot more on how do I get more face time, or how do I get more sales time and administrative work that SDRs do today. Because what I think is happening right now is that SDRs are actually finding ways to hide behind the administrative tasks, to not be proactive and get on the phone, not be emailing, to not be doing social selling, quote unquote social selling. It's just selling their activities, and they're hiding behind the administrative task that take up a lot of their day. So if you can eliminate the administrative task out of their day, and this is all salespeople, and give them more time with their customer or more time with their prospect, they're going to be ultimately more effective. So I think that's where the role changes. First, I think people figure that out. How do I get you more time to do the things that you're good at, or the things that we need you to do to close more deals? I really feel that if you get an SDR more time to talk to prospects, they're going to be more effective. If you give an account executive more time to talk to customers and prospects, they're going to sell more deals. That's what I think the first thing AI needs to really solve with sales is, how do I eliminate all that and just give you the information you need to be effective? So that's where I see 5 and 10 years. And then there's still going to be good salespeople that are doing it on their own, accelerate what they do.
Yeah. Great conversation. Really interesting one. And I think something that we'll have to come back to periodically and see, okay, what's the state of the union with BDRs?
Yeah, I'm interested when 5 years from now we're still doing Real Sales Talk, we look back at the conversation and see where it went.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. Well, let's go ahead and wrap up. Real Sales Talk family, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you. We've got some new things coming down the pipeline, so excited to introduce you to those. If you've got any questions, you want to send us some feedback, some thoughts, you're stuck on something in a sales deal, shoot us an email. Phill is phill@realsalestalk.live, and my email address is Sean, SEAN, @realsalestalk.live, and I should add Phill is with 2 L's at the end, PHILL. So with that said, we'll see you guys on the next episode of Real Sales Talk. Talk to you soon.